Captain Midnight.
Okay, so recently a new Middle-earth movie with the working title The Lord of the Rings: The Hunt for Gollum was announced with a 2026 release date. This is big news, but it's not like Lord of the Rings announcements are all that rare these days. You of course have the big budget Amazon show Rings of Power, all the recent Magic the Gathering crossover stuff, a video game that was really only notable for being terrible, and even a big budget anime film starring Brian Cox that's due out this December. Those rights are just all over the place at this point, with different corporations owning different slices of J.R.R. Tolkien's magnum opus and the films that sprang from it. But Warner Brothers and Hunt for Gollum have a distinct advantage in one very simple way. They own the Lord of the Rings movies. The Rings of Power shot in New Zealand and hired Howard Shore, the composer of the trilogy, to do their theme song in a pretty obvious attempt to tie itself into those movies in the minds of viewers. Warner can just directly tap into the exact iconography that people know and love. To make that connection even more concrete, Peter Jackson is returning to produce, while Gollum actor Andy Serkis will be directing. I'm going to dive into all this, but first I want to say real quick that the digital edition of the first issue of my comic Binary Sea is for sale right now on Amazon. I'm really proud of it, and if you like pirates, sci-fi, or a tense adventure story, check it out at the link below. I'm just loving reading the responses to it so far. With that though, let's get back to Middle-earth. Because here's the thing, I want to be excited about this. Like, you have no idea how much I just want to be really uncynically, wholeheartedly excited about this. I love those movies. I have incredibly fond memories of being 10 and watching Return of the King on opening night at midnight on the big screen. I mean, I wore out my Fellowship VHS tape. I remember it got to the point where the tape would just kind of crap out by the time they meet Galadriel. Same with the books, actually. In my middle school years, my parents would do this thing where I wasn't allowed to watch any TV at all during the summer, and I hated it. But it did end up meaning that I devoured those novels in a month. Lord of the Rings is honestly one of those things I just like to engage with on a completely uncritical level, which honestly is maybe why I never got around to making a Rings of Power video.
Why does it hurt so much?
But I'll say, I'm worried about this announcement. Like, really worried, honestly, for a few reasons. One is that, is there a story to tell here? Like, really? Given the title The Hunt for Gollum, and the fact that Serkis is directing, we are kind of under the assumption that the movie will obviously be about the hunt for Gollum that happens in these books. Something so incidental, it was basically already left out of these movies entirely, and is really only described briefly in the Fellowship and a short entry in the appendices of Return of the King. It's when Aragorn hunted down Gollum long before Frodo and Sam ever met him. The draw for Warner Brothers is pretty clear. This story, however brief, includes two of the film's most beloved characters, Aragorn and Gollum, and it has them on kind of a miserable journey together. Now, Aragorn describes what happened in Book 2 of the Fellowship, Chapter 2, The Council of Elrond. So let's just get out my leather-bound, pristine edition here and check it out. There it is. Side note, does anyone familiar with book publishing know what the hell is wrong with this chapter in my copy? Like, the rest is fine, but the first half of the council and the chapter before it have almost no room between the words and the edge of the page. It has honestly annoyed me since I was 10 years old. So that's right, Del Rey Fantasy in 2001, I'm calling you out because these movie tie-in editions are terrible. Anyway, the passage where Aragorn describes this story is kind of funny now, because Gandalf tees him up to tell the tale of capturing Gollum, and Aragorn literally says, "There is little need to tell of them." It looks like Warner Brothers might disagree with you there, Strider. But okay, to be fair, he does tell the story. Gandalf and Aragorn want to know what Gollum had told the servants of Sauron, and describes tracking him down along the skirts of the Dead Marshes, where, Aragorn says, "I caught him, Gollum. He was covered in green slime. He will never love me, I fear, for he bit me, and I was not gentle. Nothing more did I ever get from his mouth than the marks of his teeth. I deemed it the worst part of my journey." Then he goes on to quickly describe how he brought Gollum to Mirkwood and how Gandalf had a long conversation with the creature. This entire story takes up about a half of a page. If you want to be generous and throw in the description of these events in the back of Return of the King, we're at most talking about one entire page worth of material here. Now that by itself isn't great, but I could maybe see how you'd get a fun odd couple pairing out of Aragorn and Gollum on the road, avoiding orcs and Nazgul, being at odds, getting into hijinks together. I guess that could be something, but I think the biggest problem here isn't that the source material for what this is likely to be is pretty thin, and also was already adapted into a fan film that was less than 40 minutes long back in 2009. It's actually a bigger issue than that. It's that everyone involved in this story had their meaningful character arcs resolved in the actual Lord of the Rings movies. We already know how things end up for Smeagol. Hell, we even saw how things start for him in the flashback that opens Return of the King, and how he lost the ring in the Hobbit movies. We've seen the film's reluctant king version of Aragorn find strength within himself, unite the nations of men, and take the throne. We've even seen Gandalf prepare for Sauron by fighting ghoulies, or whatever he was doing in Battle of the Five Armies, and then end his story sailing away from Middle-earth forever. What is left to say and do with these characters, especially Gollum, who just seems like a completely spent force at this point? I guess they could delve a lot more into Aragorn's life and backstory, but that just brings up a whole different set of questions. Will this film try to bring back Viggo Mortensen? I mean, the guy is incredible in those movies. It'll be really hard to replace him. Maybe they go the Orlando Bloom route and try to de-age him digitally, which, doesn't sound good. There's also the fact that Viggo seems like he's not rearing to get back into big blockbuster movies anytime soon. Outside of Lord of the Rings and maybe Hidalgo, that just doesn't seem like something he's had that much interest in. He turned down the Hobbit films already, so I don't know. I'm left hoping that this is a working title, just there to throw us off, and this isn't the story they're telling at all. But I kinda suspect that it is. Speaking of, it has to be acknowledged that, remember the Hobbit movies happened? I'm pretty forgiving on that first one. I enjoy it actually, but those other two, Desolation of Smaug is not without its redeeming elements, mostly great scenes adapted straight from the book, but it's so bloated and uneven, and Battle of the Five Armies is just an outright brutally bad film. Now, I know what defenders of Peter Jackson will want to say here, because I want to say it too. He was forced into a tight time frame on those movies, he had to step in to direct at the last minute, and he didn't have nearly enough time to give them the love and care that the Lord of the Rings films had. And yeah, that is clearly the reason the Hobbit movies are what they are. Hopefully that won't be the case here. I would be more excited for this movie without that 2026 release date. Maybe if there was a 2028 release date or just none attached at all. Jackson started storyboarding The Fellowship in 1997 and it came out in 2001. Now what we know from this story, the script for The Hunt for Gollum is still in the early stages of development. Maybe there's been far more work done behind the scenes than we're aware of, and I really hope that's the case. I just really don't want to see them make the same mistake twice and rush this thing. And on top of all of that, there's my uncertainty with Andy Serkis' direction. Obviously, he did great and groundbreaking work in the original trilogy and the Apes films, and I respect him as an actor quite a bit. But his biggest directing credit is Venom Let There Be Carnage, a movie I didn't really care for. Still, with all that said, a part of me can't help but be excited and hopeful about this project. The original trilogy still means a lot to me, and having Jackson on board definitely isn't nothing. I'll always like to spend more time in that world, and I'd love it if this film took more from The Fellowship and presented something a bit smaller in scope than the large-scale battles that Return of the King had. Fellowship of the Ring is maybe my single favorite blockbuster film of all time. I honestly think it's pretty perfect. And I'm just not immune to being excited about returning to all of that. But I'd really like to see what this movie is going to offer that isn't just adapting a few paragraphs that weren't important enough to be included the first time around. That kind of worries me. But what do you think? Are you excited about this movie? Are you worried about it too? Am I being overly pessimistic here? Let me know, and one last plug for my comic Binary C. I should have a link for it down in the description. I'm really excited for you all to read it, and if you do, hit me up and let me know what you think. I really want to hear your thoughts, and I will be back with another video hopefully very soon.
Here's a special tip for the fellas and girls who have not already joined Captain Midnight's new 1940 Flight Patrol. You'd better hurry up and join at once because there's a big adventure ahead. The thing to do now is to get started because we're going to have not only barrels of fun, but loads of free gifts and prizes, too.